So I make it 4:30, and therefore I'm going to start the session. Welcome, everyone. My name's Daisy. I work for Getting On Board. I hope that you're here today to hear about what trustees can do about climate change. That is today's session as part of our Trustee Learning Programme. If you're not here for that, I would recommend staying because I think it's going to be a really important and really insightful conversation. So you are very welcome, even if you've accidentally turned up. So I've just got a couple of bits of housekeeping before I hand over to Liz, who is going to walk us through this wonderful topic that we're here to discuss today. So we've just heard the Zoom lady tell us that the session is being recorded, and you will get access to that. We are going to upload it to our YouTube channel where all of our sessions go as well. So if you find that you've got people on your board that you want to send the session to, you'll be able to do that via YouTube. And we hope that's a really good way of being able to revisit the content and be able to share it as well. There are no slides today. It is a panel discussion, so there's nothing to receive from that front. Couple of Zoom bits. Please, could I ask you to stay muted on the call unless we ask you to unmute to ask a question or make a comment. It just makes sure that to keep the kind of the line clear, if that makes sense, and to make sure that we can make sure we can hear who's talking. I do have the power to mute you, and I'm not afraid to use it. We've also got closed captions available, so they will kind of do their best job at transcribing the conversation live. If they're helpful to you, you need to enable these on your Zoom. So you'll have a bar at the bottom and it will say enable closed captions. So they're enabled if you would find them useful. Today's session, we're kind of talking about big ideas. So we have this in here for all of our sessions around session content being specific to England and Wales. There's other sessions that we have more specifically that very much focus on kind of charity commission rules and regulations. But I kind of the principles apply really. I hope that today's conversation is UK inclusive and talks about kind of big themes. But I just wanted to say that everyone's welcome if you are from Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. The chat function's available today. We'd love to hear from you. We suspect it might be one of those topics where we're here to kind of sit and listen and take in and soak up, but no question is a silly question. So if you want to share advice, experiences, and ask questions, please use the chat to do that. We'd really love to hear from you. Please just make sure that your comments are respectful and useful. And then very lastly, before we get into it, I just wanted to thank our sponsors, Russell Cook. They sponsor this whole strand around governance and how we can be the best trustees that we can. And the session was free for you to attend today. And all of our sessions in our Trustee Learning Programme are free. And that's thanks to our sponsors, Russell Cook. So I just wanted to give them a big shout out because it's really important that we kind of take time to stop and think about these issues. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Liz, who is going to start our conversation. Over to you, Liz.
Welcome all, and thank you for joining us. This is a really important conversation, and I know for a number of you, if not all, this is going to be quite a new topic. So, as Daisy was saying, please don't be afraid to speak up. We're all on the journey together. I'm Liz Gadd. I'm a very proud trustee of two smaller organisations, the Environmental Funders Network and the Eating Better Alliance. And my day job is as environmental lead with the charity think tank MPC. And there I co-lead the Everyone's Environment Coalition, which is all about action on the social impacts of the environmental crises. I'm hoping we can have a great discussion together with you and the panel today. Before we get started, I just wanted to seed with you three thoughts. The first one is that the changes we're already seeing to the climate and our environment affect our operations, our services, and the people we support. And whilst our collective carbon footprint as charities and funders does make a difference, for most of us, especially the smaller, medium-sized charities, the impact that we can have through our mission and our programmes far outstrips the impact that we can have through making our operations more environmentally friendly. The second thought is we can make a significant impact because we work with the people most affected. In the UK, as is the case globally, it's those who are disadvantaged or marginalised already for other reasons who are being and will be most affected by our changing environment. So that often is people living in poverty, living with chronic health conditions, often from ethnic minority communities, some older people, disabled people, those identifying as LGBTQ+, and most of all, young people, particularly those who are more concerned with their financial, food, housing security than perhaps they are with environmental issues. And the voices and needs of these groups who are least heard on environmental issues need to be raised. And as charities, we have trusted relationships with these groups. We understand their needs. We can raise their voices. And thirdly, lastly, as trustees, we've got a moral obligation to act. And in addition to that, it also touches on our legal obligations, that to act in the charity's best interests, to make adequately informed and balanced decisions about short and longer term issues, and of course, to manage risks. More importantly, we've got agency ourselves to help contribute to making the society that we all live in now and in the future fairer, healthier, as well as more sustainable. So really looking forward to talking about all of that. And I'm delighted to be joined by the most wonderful panel. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves in turn. Tell us a little bit about your role, what your organisation does to integrate environmental issues into your work, why this is important to you. Jen, should we start with you?
Thank you very much. So I'm Jen Thornton. I am a trustee of My Society. We are a charity that uses technology to help people kind of understand and connect with the decisions and the democracy that affects them. So we run websites you may have heard of, like theyworkforyou.com, What Do They Know, and Fix My Street. So we're all about helping people understand what's going on and interact with it. It's about community, it's about transparency. So in terms of climate, we have done a couple of distinct projects that I'm sure we'll come to later in the chat. But the position we've taken on it is that it is a problem for everyone, as Liz, you've just said. And specifically from My Society's area of works, we think that the climate is a problem of decision making. It's about how we collectively as a society go forwards, and that is how it interlinks with our core mission of helping people understand those decisions and play their part in them. So that's where we're coming from. And I think I'm handing over to Samira.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone. I'm Samira. I'm the Climate Action Lead at Muslim Charities Forum, or MCF. So essentially, for those of you who don't know, MCF is the UK network for British Muslim-led charities working for social good here in the UK and abroad. So through our network, we kind of aim to collectively build a more accountable, transparent, and efficient charitable sector, as well as to contribute towards a more just and sustainable future. So in terms of climate work, we know that climate change is directly affecting the work of our charities that we serve, and in turn the communities that they serve. And also environmental stewardship and taking climate action is a core part of our Islamic faith. And we believe that we have a moral duty to take care of the planet as well as the people in it. So the main part of my work is to essentially just increase the British Muslim-led charitable sector's understanding, response, as well as commitment to climate action. So that's that in a nutshell. I'll pass over to Janet.
Thanks, Samira. Hi, I'm Janet. I'm the Chief Exec of Reach Volunteering. I'm also a trustee of a really small charity called the Movements Trust, which is all about increasing the flow of funding through to social movements. Reach Volunteering is basically here to connect up people who want to volunteer their expertise with charities and social movements that need that expertise, either as trustees, so maybe there's some people on the call who've found their role through Reach, I don't know, I hope so, or as skills-based volunteers. So that's which we define as needing 3 or more years professional experience to apply to do the role. We're kind of very generalist, small infrastructure charity, but we, kind of very much like the other speakers, see climate as a central challenge for civil society, and therefore needs to be central to us. And we've also put justice and sustainability at the kind of heart of our vision. In practice, we're sort of still working out as we go along what we can do there most influentially or most impactfully. We've run a couple of campaigns around this area. One of them is Volunteer for Climate, which worked really well. And yeah, I'm sure to talk about those in more detail in a bit.
Thank you so much. So we're going to have quite an open, relaxed conversation. All of you who've joined us today, feel free to jump in at any time. Either raise your hand, put a question or a comment in the chat. I'll keep an eye on both. But to kick us off, I'm going to ask the panel to rewind their minds and go right back to the beginning of their journeys and tell us a little bit about how you got the topic on the agenda in your organisations, where you got started. Samira, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So this might actually be surprising to some of you, but senior leadership were entirely on board with kickstarting our kind of climate work. So in fact, our chair actually works for a climate related organization, and many of the board members work in organizations or charities that are actively tackling climate change in whatever capacity. So that kind of top level buy-in really helped establishing our climate program here at MCF. And because there was that understanding and kind of appreciation for the importance of climate action within all levels, whether it's from the trustees to the staff, this support actually kind of really helped further our objectives and make it an official part of our work plan. So in terms of how it actually got kickstarted, so it obviously started from that first conversation, but we started acting first within our limited capacity to join the wider climate conversation and to just join in on different environmental initiatives or events such as Great Big Green Week, which many of you might know about. And we also sought to create like some kind of climate resources as well as establishing the Green Hotspot Initiative. So this is just initiative that we helped found where we saw hundreds of mosques across the country deliver sermons on Fridays related to climate change. So since then, we've kind of been able to obtain a dedicated like funding for our climate program, as well as just to be able to further our projects. And we were able to conduct and officially launch, actually last month, our research that looked into climate action amongst British Muslim-led charities and organizations in the UK. So just a quick sum up of the research, it essentially was just to gauge the current levels of engagement and barriers to meaningful climate action, as well as providing like recommendations to increase engagement across the sector. So yeah, that's pretty much how we got the topic on the agenda and what we're up to at the moment. So yeah.
It's so interesting that you already had some environmental expertise on the board. I think that's probably sometimes a matter of chance for organisations whose main business isn't environmental issues. Was it the same for you guys, Jen? Did you have any environmental expertise on the board when you began the journey?
So my personal journey with this is interesting because I joined the board much more recently. My society were talking about or doing action about this 5 years ago. So I only joined the board a couple of years ago, but I did, in preparation for this, have a couple of conversations with people about when we started this work. And we do have people on the board who are sort of tangentially climate-ish related, but not kind of climate experts, probably, as you say, because it's not explicitly a climate charity, so people aren't necessarily drawn to be on the board for that reason. But what my society did to kick it off was, as I understand, when this kind of came to the board for conversations probably 6 years ago, realistically, there was a lot of questions about actually, is it our role to do this? We already do a thing that's over here, is climate over here? And as we've come to over the years, it's very much that they are together. So the philosophy that the board at the time started to work on was actually this question of what is your unique thing here? What's the approach or what's the contribution that our organisation can make that is special, which is how we then eventually ended up on this. Okay, it's about decisions, it's about people being able to get information to have the right impact. But yeah, that through that journey, I think it was a bit of a difficult one of how to convince on a governance level that is something we should embed. And we are still working through it on what level of prioritization it should have as a result of that. But yeah, that's how it kind of got started.
Really interesting. I've heard Janet, you say before some similar things around balancing the main purpose and the context you're working in. There's a phrase you've used before I absolutely love about climate being an era, not an issue. And was the headspace like that in Reach when you guys began your journey, or did you come to that conclusion over time?
Yeah, it was actually just before this call I prepared to sort of look back, because you kind of forget, don't you, the chronology. And um what actually happened was that was very much not where the trustees' heads were at. I kind of kicked the ball off by signing up to the Akivo climate pledge, which was really useful because it framed it in terms of nature as well as climate, and it was quite kind of bold, and it put climate justice at the center of it, which was really useful because I'm not a climate expert by any means, and there was no one on the board who was a climate expert either, so it kind of gave it a useful framing. But at that point, the board was really, I was expecting the board to push back, to be honest, because it seemed quite a leap in a way, even though to me it seemed like very, very central. Like, if we care about humans, we care about society, we care about civil society, then we need to care about climate. But I think we've done quite a lot of talking about EDI, which takes you into conversations which are wider than your organization's very narrow remit. And I think that really helped the board just be a little bit bolder and more confident, or a bit more gung-ho. And we didn't really have much of a plan. We just kind of set off with an intention, really, and a resolve. But I was surprised the board were quite up for it, despite having no particular background in climate. I think they just saw it as quite a sensible focus. But we haven't had an awful lot of debate at board level since, on to the framing it more as an era rather than an issue. And I think if I'm totally honest, I think there's probably still more work for us to do internally on that. I'm not sure we're all on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a journey that we're all on. There isn't a kind of right answer. I think one of the interesting things along the journey is how all of our understanding evolves and grows. None of us have to be environmental experts. There are environmental organisations out there that do that wonderfully. But what we're experts in and what we know about, bringing that to the conversation can be really, really important. How did you guys go about making those links, and how do you keep that conversation going? Because there's all that stuff going on there out there. How do you map which bits of it are relevant to your mission and your organization? What's to kick us off? Jen, can I pick on you? Do jump in, guys.
The giant question.
Million-dollar question.
Yeah, I think so. We sort of so the way my society, very quick sort of history is, it started with some people that thought we can use our tech skills to make this democracy stuff easier. And it was very like, pizza and beer, Friday night kind of nerds thing is how it began. And over time has developed into a charity with a kind of governance structure. But being a tech company that is inherently that kind of, run fast, try things, have ideas, it's very easy for both the organisation, the staff, and also the board on a governance perspective to have so many ideas and all sorts of different new ways to do things and things that we can use tech for. So actually on climate, but actually on all of our core work, we have a process of looking at what are the things that we need to take forward, what are the things where the emphasis comes. So we were already practiced, I guess, at doing that process of looking and saying, is this an idea that needs to be funded, needs to carry on? Is it something that's kind of cool and can go over there for a bit? And so with the climate work, we are still in the process, I guess, of working out which of those things are the right things to be part of. So the first kind of actual climate project that my society did was part of the Climate Assembly UK in 2019. And it was effectively a small part of a bigger project. So it was saying we've got something we can offer to this world. to help with someone else's kind of strategy. So my society basically built the digital platform for people to take part in that, and that's how that got started. And then the next kind of major project, which is still something that is being iterated, is collating council climate action plans. So my society's kind of biggest site is What Do They Know, which is a filter that helps you get FOI requests through organisations. And we use the same sort of process, the same community, some of the same tech to help people crowdsource what different councils are doing on climate and set that information out in a way that was relevant. So sort of with that example, you can see how that tracks with the sort of things that my society is already good at and has the expertise in. So I'm not sure that quite answered your question, but that's sort of part of the process we go through as to working out what are the right things and what are the interventions that we specifically can make, as opposed to trying to duplicate things that other people are doing.
Yeah, and there's an element of sort of popping your toe in the water with something. There's often a project that naturally arises, or there's an obvious starting point to explore a little bit more, and then one thing tends to lead to another, doesn't it? Samira, Jen, what was your experience? How do you go about mapping what the changing environment means for your organisations and where you fit into the big picture?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think it's good to kind of establish like our work in itself. So we are like an infrastructure charity, so we don't necessarily work with communities themselves, but we work with charities that work with communities. So what we do is we support them and we hope to represent them as well as like connect them with each other. So one thing we did notice was that, of course, climate change is an issue that the world is starting to see is increasingly becoming an issue for people, right? And we noticed that the work of the charities that we serve was directly being affected by climate change. So, for example, the charities that work, like our members who work internationally, that are responding and delivering aid to those worst hit by the climate crisis. So they're witnessing firsthand how climate change is claiming lives and claiming people's livelihoods as well. And it was just an issue that could not be ignored further, of course. So we knew in that sense we had to prioritize climate action within our strategy and our work plan. So since then, we've tried to, of course, help support these charities with their climate-related initiatives, or provide like recommendations or resources to help them just kind of increase their like overall engagement with climate action, as well as to kind of represent them in the wider climate conversation. Because these organizations they might be working on amazing climate projects, but not realizing that they are. So it's just drawing those links and representing them and spotlighting their amazing work, and ultimately encouraging others in the sector to take on climate projects, and realizing that it's not as daunting as people might think. So yeah, that's just how we kind of map the issue.
People sort of build confidence together then, as they're like, oh, we're all in the same boat and swapping ideas. If you started to see that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think collaboration's a huge thing in climate work, and people, just the sharing of ideas, like even what we're doing here today, like, just sharing good practice and realizing that if, a charity that's kind of similar to you is taking this on board and it's actually possible, perhaps, we should consider like incorporating into our work. So yeah, definitely collaboration is key.
Do you keep the questions coming in the chat? There's been a little bit of discussion about the wearing of many hats. Is that something you feel a lot of, Janet? Wearing the data hat, the climate hat, the day job hat, the impact hat?
I think not really, actually, just because I think what Jen said about and actually Samira as well, about kind of thinking what angle, what corner do you approach this from that makes most sense, given what you do in the organization or the people that you work with. So for us, for example, we we started off with quite an intentional campaign, but which was quite abstract in a way. It was all about trying to focus and center, spotlight even the values that sit behind volunteering. On the basis that what we need is a cultural shift if we're going to address the climate emergency and move away from a sort of fragmented individualistic society which is very focused on consumption towards one which is focused more on care and solidarity and mutual support. But all of that is very much aligned to what we do anyway, right? And so we sort of started doing that, and then one of the staff actually said, "Do you know there's loads of climate organisations already using Reach?" I was like, "Really? I didn't realise that." So then we looked at how many amazing climate groups were already using Reach, and we were like, "Okay, let's just shine the spotlight on that and make a little campaign on that." And that was so in line with what we were already doing, and it was such a useful next step because there are so many people who want to volunteer for climate action as well. So it was really like pushing it and open doors. So that's a slightly sideways way of answering the question, but I think the point is that once you start looking at it, you can just see how much is actually that you're doing is in many ways climate related or could be tweaked or shaped to become climate focused. And I think that's the right place to be doing it, right? Because one, you're going to have the capacity to do it, but two, you're bringing your expertise and your particular perspective in a way that can be quite useful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting reflecting on the different roles of people in the organisation in taking that forward. In amongst our panel, we've got a mix of different staff roles and trustee roles. What's been your experience of who's leading which bits of the conversation? How much did staff lead the conversation? How much did trustees? Did one group have to get the other group on board? How did that conversation begin in that way?
Shall I kick off this?
Go for it.
So I think I sort of touched on this in my last answer, but when it initially came to the board, it was staff, sort of leadership team saying we've got some ideas about things we should do in the climate space, and then it became a board conversation. But since I have been on the board, it's very much been this is something, there's been an agreement really from across our board and senior leadership that this is something that is our moral responsibility. So it's very nice for me to be on a board where that's accepted as the situation, you know, that's what people think is right. So we are coming from a place of this is an imperative thing to do. I guess the challenge then comes from the board looking at it and saying we have limited funding, we've got to keep all this afloat, you know, how many interesting and kind of creative climate projects are we going to be able to achieve without accidentally trying to become a climate charity? There are loads of those. So I think that's it, sort of started that way, but it's very much everyone is in agreement on the fact that it matters. So for us now, it's a case of just working out what are the things that actually we can have an influence on, and what actually we need to park for now. And sometimes that means that there's really great ideas that can't go forward, but I think we've got to a place where the board are able to work with staff and both understand each other on that, really.
Some key prioritization questions lurking in all of that on multiple fronts. One of the things that I hear a lot of from trustees and from staff is that people worry about their expertise in that space. They worry about putting their head above the parapet when they're not an environmental expert, which, you know, we don't all have to be. And I hear the phrase a lot, people worry about getting their house in order, which they often, when they use that phrase, they're talking about, do I need to think about our own carbon emissions and having an environmental strategy and so on before I think about, well, what does it mean for our mission, our organisation? I think there's sometimes a little bit of nervousness, maybe even sometimes fear of putting your foot in it and maybe being in a position where people might say, oh, well, that's a bit hypocritical because you've not done whatever it is. Did any of you have those kinds of conversations? How do you strike the balance? Where have you ended up on that?
Happy to jump in on this one. I feel very strongly about it.
Go, Janet.
When we first put climate on the agenda at Reach, one of the things I was told to do was to go and examine our own carbon footprint. So I just said yes, but and then we went and you can get a free eco audit from City Bridge. So I went through the motions, but the eco auditor was like, well, really, there's nothing to assess. You're a tiny online organization. And the only meaningful thing we could really do in that space was to move our hosting to our website hosting to an organization that just uses renewable energy, which was the right thing to do, and that was positive. But it really first with I'm part of the Akiva Climate Crisis Working Group as well. We were the kind of ones who first created the pledge, and it's had really low take up. And one of the reasons for that is that organizations are really worried about signing up to it and then being, not having had their house in order for exactly that reason. And is charities have got so little resource, and it's going to be such a massive distraction to go about trying to green your own operations by and large, not for every charity, but the vast majority. And none of us have got the time and energy to go and do that. And the gains will be so marginal. And yet the bigger prize, like you've already said, Liz, is kind of how do we advocate for and support the people and places that we serve, and how do we think about how climate is going to impact on them, and how do we work with them to try and come out with the best possible solutions for that. And it's just and resources are already tight, headspace is already tight. If you spend time in your own greening your own operations, you're just going to kick the can down the road. And I think it's such a wasted opportunity.
I agree, it can often be so, unless you're a really, really big organization. As you say, the gains are going to be so marginal. In the main, it's things like where our pension providers are, or, if you're a funder with a huge endowment, where you invest that can make the biggest differences. Let's talk a bit more about the people, though. You were talking about involving the people that you work with. Open question to all three of you. What's the role of the people that you support, those with lived experience in your various charities or the charities that you're supporting? What should all of us be thinking about as trustees in terms of how we engage our people in those discussions?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. So I think when it comes to engaging your people, your donors, or your beneficiaries, essentially, I think it's first and foremost crucial to kind of engage them in the conversation and also kind of educate them on why taking climate action is so important. For example, if you are a organization that works, with tackling health inequalities, you probably recognize how climate change has been, causing more, like for example, a result of air pollution, more respiratory illnesses, or heat waves causing heat strokes, and a lot of illnesses related to that. So I guess just educating your donor base on that and engaging them with, why you are wanting to take up climate projects, and just engaging them and taking them along with your journey as well, because I'm pretty sure they really appreciate that. And also, as trustees, it's really important to be drawing those links and understanding the co-benefits of taking climate action. So we all know the role of trustees to essentially ensure that the resources of a charity are being applied, responsibly and in a way that furthers the charitable objectives. So if you're not considering how taking climate action can, further your programs, or your reduce your overheads or admin costs, for example, then I don't think it's as effective as it should be, if that makes sense. So more bluntly, not taking climate action would be much more detrimental and expensive as well for your overall charitable objectives. So
Absolutely. We got a really great question in the chat. How can you sustain focus on climate change at board level amid the many urgent day-to-day issues of the charity? That balance of urgent versus important. Jen was talking about prioritization earlier. Easier said than done, isn't it? But there's this bigger question as well about there are just so many things to deal with, especially if you're working with organizations and with people who are really at the sharp end of a lot of the challenges going on at the moment, rising poverty, the cost of living, and so on. How is that balance struck? How have each of you been able to maintain enough focus on the board that you felt comfortable to come and talk at an event like today?
So I think, I mean, obviously, as you say, I did talk about prioritization before. I think the way that we work, obviously, we do work with people, but possibly in a slightly different way to uh, the way that a lot of people think charities work with people, I guess. People access our websites online. So it can feel quite arm's length, but obviously we, as I said, consider climate to be a kind of crisis of decision making at this point. And it is people in communities and active citizens who will influence the decisions that get made. So I guess in terms of how we keep it on the agenda, it almost the climate kind of puts itself on the agenda in a lot of ways, because that is this huge decision of our time. You know, the other things, the cost of living, all of that sort of thing, they are big decisions. Of course they are, and when we look at the data that comes, you're going to ask me for stats. I'm telling you now, I don't have them. We can follow them up. But the data that comes back from our websites, is that they're the sort of things that people want to know what their politicians are saying about these key issues. There's like hyper local stuff about people who want their pothole repaired, and then there's giant stuff like what's this government minister said about the cost of living. And the climate just comes right across all of that, right? It's all relevant. So I think it puts itself there in a way. The challenge, I think, partly we have a challenge anyway with funding because we're a sort of slightly strange organization. So some funders are really like on board with, we make these websites to do creative things, and other funders have I mean, everyone will have had this problem in different ways, right? It's a big charity issue. Funders have very specific criteria, and sometimes it can be quite challenging to fit into a criteria. So I think for us, one of the questions that we haven't resolved yet, we still think about a lot, is how much to push on the climate stuff and focus on climate funding, but actually we've got to balance out the rest of the work that we do, because the expertise and the unique contribution we can make on climate is only there because of the other core stuff that we have. So actually we can't let it tip over completely and go, well, we'll just become a climate charity, because actually that's not, our expertise isn't there. It's about the decisions, it's about the democracy. So I think we have to kind of, while it presents itself constantly, we have to bring it back to like, this is the part of it we're talking about. This is the solution that we have for that outcome. And remind ourselves that it's actually about fitting it in to our kind of work rather than trying to step out into something else.
Wholeheartedly. It's worth pursuing that conversation about funding a bit further because, of course, that is a challenge for all charities at the moment, regardless of our size. Need is rising, funding is in short supply. It's a constant juggling act for everybody. How have you been able to fund doing work that intersects between the day job and environmental issues? What challenges, what opportunities have you found there in terms of like how open are funders to talking to you about this? How tricky has it been to find the funding to take forward great ideas?
Well, I'm happy to jump in, although I can't say anything very positive on that line. It's really hard. I mean, it's hard as an infrastructure charity. We're also really difficult to find, we don't fit funders' criteria by and large. So it's a challenge. And that really resonated what Jen just said actually about how much do you push on the climate angle when a lot of this is about how do you frame what you're doing, and you could frame it as a climate thing, or you could frame it as something else, and I think that's actually relates to the earlier question about how do you keep it on the agenda given the fact there's so many issues, because I really don't see climate as an extra issue that you have to add on to the incredibly long list of issues. I really do see it as the era through which we're going to be dealing with all of the issues that we deal with. And so I think in that context, everything is a climate question. It's just a question, it's just a matter of whether you're emphasizing that side of it or something else. That said, there are a few things we would have loved to have done, and one of them was a slightly meta thing to say on this call, but we really wanted to try. We recruit a lot of trustees, and we wanted to see what we could do to support trustees to think about climate, because I know there is evidence that trustees are somewhat of a break in a lot of organizations when it comes to thinking about climate. And we've totally failed to find any funding to help us do that work, because funders are just not interested really in, or don't seem to be willing to fund that kind of slightly intersectional work, if you want to put it that way. So I think it is really tough, but I know it's growing. Lottery's growing there. I don't want to sound too doomy, because I know that there are funders kind of beginning to come to the table, but yeah, certainly from our side, we have found it quite difficult, which is why the things that we've done have been very much the kind of things we do already, but we just given them a climate slant, because then we haven't had to find extra money for them. We've just sort of, yeah, given a little bit more momentum in our own current work program.
That's really helpful. How about you guys, Samira? What's the experience been of the Muslim Charities Forum in finding funding to move into this space?
I mean, I think I touched upon this at the beginning, but it was us having initially worked on different, environmental initiatives like within our capacity at the start. I think that helped kind of build a case for funding, and we were able to obtain that funding to further our work and to deliver more projects, for example. But having said that, I think there's still going to be issue of lack of resources or manpower to kind of scale up projects or initiatives. For example, I'm the only person working in climate related work in my organization, and we're quite a small organization as it is. But and I appreciate that a lot of organizations probably won't even have a dedicated person to work on climate related initiatives. But I feel like if you had maybe a team, a bigger team, if even like 3 people, the impact could be much more significant. And I know this is an issue that a lot of organizations are facing, because our research even found that that was the number one like kind of barrier to meaningful climate action, was the lack of resources. And yeah, so it's we've got a long way to go, but most definitely it's always going to be probably an area that we're facing issues with as well.
All of those experiences really resonate with what I've experienced myself, but also heard other organisations talking about. I think we're at a bit of a tipping point though now. When I'm wearing my trustee hat as a part of the Environmental Funders Network, I see a lot of environmental funders becoming more and more interested all the time in how issues relating to people's lives are impacting areas of their interest. We're seeing a coming together there. And as you say, with like National Lottery and other big names thinking from the other perspective, I think perhaps the social and environmental funders are slowly moving a bit closer together in the space that overlaps. Although at the moment it's a bit scattergun as and where dedicated funding pots might be. Hopefully we're going to see more of that. And we'll also see, as Janet was talking about with embedding the topics, that actually we won't need to be in our siloed little spaces anymore, because things will start to be more integrated. But what's also been really interesting to observe over the last maybe even just 6 to 9 months is a real uptick in funders starting to embed environmental questions into their discussions with their prospective grantees. And to start with, I got really worried because it often seemed to be a tick boxy thing about carbon emissions. And I was like, that's probably not what we want to focus on here, people, for the reasons we discussed earlier. But increasingly now, I'm seeing funders of all different stripes asking questions about, and what does this mean for the people that you support, and what kind of help do you need? And that's really heartwarming to see. So I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes more and more an opportunity rather than a challenge as the coming months unfold. Fingers crossed, anyway, that would be really nice. Thinking about sort of other barriers that you've experienced and potentially overcome, what do you see at the moment as the big wins that you've had? Or maybe it's the small wins, because on those foundations, big wins are built. What are the barriers that you've overcome, and what are the barriers that you're facing now that it just might be interesting to share a few thoughts on for trustees who are a few steps behind you in exploring these issues? Jump in, whoever's got something to share. What barriers overcome? What barriers on the mind?
So I have some thoughts. Let's give it a go. So I mean, obviously our big thing is always, I mean, we've literally just said funding, right? My one word suggestion on funding though is partners, because that's actually how we've done the kind of specifically climate things that we've done. I think one thing that was maybe a barrier, maybe a kind of sticking point for the thought process was like, what do you do with this climate information when you have it? Where does it lead to? What is that outcome that we think we can get to or influence or support or provide? And actually from that being a sticking point for thought, it's actually turned into a real benefit for the rest of our work. Because we, as is often the case with technology, and in my day job, I work in comms, and anyone else who's worked in comms will be familiar with this. We are blessed with many solutions in need of a problem or in need of an outcome. And actually realizing, sort of having that clarity of the vision on, there is a climate crisis, we have to resolve it, here is a solution that is going to help us. We've actually then started to look at the rest of our work in terms of, actually, we've got all these really great solutions, and our service users are taking them and making outcomes of them. But we've sort of actually shifted a bit of our perspective, and we've started a whole new kind of stream of work looking at what is that influencing, what are those outcomes, what are the things we can do with what our work is, and then take it into that space of saying, right, and here are some changes we can make and how we can make them. So actually the climate has helped us see something more clearly about everything else that we've been doing while we've gone through the process.
And share it took me to, but I wasn't as quick as Jen. It took me a while to think what the big wins and barriers were. I think the biggest barrier from where I'm sitting is still just learning how to talk about it. I still think it's a really difficult conversation to have, or people fear that it will be, and we're not quite sure how to talk about it. And I think that goes within our organization and outside as well. And, you know, there is a degree of sort of people not wanting to engage with it still. So I think that is a barrier. Kind of, I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself now, but on the other side, the big wins for us that I didn't really anticipate through the values campaign we ran, and also with the Volunteer for Climate, I think, was how we actually had a really positive message, which is that people do care. Look at people, all these people volunteering, you know, they're doing it because they care, and there's lots of them. And likewise with the Volunteer for Climate, look at all these, you know, a lot of the organizations we were supporting were entirely volunteer-led groups, and they were doing amazing things. And it was like, look at all these people coming together to do amazing things, to take action on climate for no money in their spare time. And that's really hopeful. And people are really encouraged by that. And we were surprised in a way by how enthusiastic people were about that, and how it kind of actually led to a whole program of work, community of practice on the values work, for example, that we totally hadn't anticipated, which Common Cause Foundation very kindly kind of gave us pro bono support to run. So I think the big wins are how much, I'm going to say, there is a seam of people who really, really want to engage and do something on this. And it's, if you can tap into that, it's immensely positive. I saw some news just a couple of days ago where they were reporting on how employees of of companies are really, it's one of the main factors in their job hunting, whether the organization that they're joining has got good environmental policies or a good business model that's sustainable, for example. And I think there's just a lot of people out there who really do want to do something. They just need to be given the means or the opportunity. So that was the kind of big win.
Super. And on the note of positives, flip side to the barriers, what things have you found really helpful along the way? Have there been sources of information, practical places to go? While you have a little bit of a think about it, I will just list two of my favourites. There's in Scotland, the Growing Climate Confidence, and covering the northeast is Going Green Together. Even though they've got a geographical specific lens, they're really useful spaces for tips, tools, advice, and information for a wide range of organisations. And I'll post again the work of the Everyone's Environment programme. Have there been other sources of information or practical tools that any of you have found particularly useful on the journey?
I actually was thinking of the Going Green Together one. That campaign is absolutely brilliant. And a lot of their resources have been really useful to us as an organization as well. So I highly recommend that. If I can be cheeky and plug our recent climate report, it's in the chat at the moment, but at the end section, and it's not just for all kind of organizations can benefit, not just Muslim-led charities, but it has quite a few resources like how to create your own environmental policy or some low-cost event ideas. Because tackling climate change doesn't have to be some grand project that you're working on. It can be something really small, and those small actions can eventually make a big difference in the long term. And I think we've got some bits on strategies with climate comms and just a bit of advice on that. So yeah, I think a lot of people can benefit from that, hopefully. So
Janet, Jen, any places that are your go-tos for information and keeping up to date?
I'd give a vote to the Everyone's Environment work on particularly the work on how it impacts on different areas like poverty, race, disability, for example. I think that's really helpful. But the other thing that I've found really useful is actually just getting in touch with people and ask people who are doing something which looks interesting or useful and just asking them for a chat, because people are really keen to, no one has the answers. Everyone who's grappling with this really does feel like they're grappling with it. They know that they don't have the answers, but they're really keen to talk about it, and they're really keen to support others who want to do something about it. So I think just don't feel shy of picking up the phone to anyone who's doing anything on this, and they will almost undoubtedly be really happy to have a chat. And I found that really useful.
We're all on the learning journey together, definitely. And it's always surprising how a little conversation with someone can prompt an idea for something that they've been working on that you hadn't thought of yet, and vice versa. What about some practical tips for anyone who's listening today, who's on the beginning of their journey, thinking about what our changing climate and environment means for their organisation? Based on your experience so far, what's your advice for starting off? Are there particular questions that they should be asking, things they should be thinking about? Samira, Jen, go first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's what we've kind of come back to is what is your organisation's unique contribution? That's been the big question that I've kind of thought was the most informative thing. We also sometimes reference a Simon Sharp quote saying it's not about your footprint, it's about your point of leverage, which is very climate specific, but actually maps to a lot of things. It's what is the impact that you can have? So a little bit flashback to when we were talking about greening our own servers, and obviously those things are very important, but actually is what is the leverage? What is the thing that you can do? So I would definitely say that's been the most helpful bit for me, from a governance point of view, is starting from what do we do? What is our unique contribution here to this massive problem that if we're going to solve it, we're all going to have to make those unique contributions. So yeah, that would be my first port of call.
I can go ahead and give a tip. I think something that's really important is to, if you're not a trustee yourself, is to not make assumptions that trustees are disengaged or this is not a priority issue for them, because it just might be. So I think I would just advise to, first and foremost, just start the conversation, like at your next board meeting, like have this as a agenda item, and just in a non-judgmental kind of reflective way, just listen to every trustee's kind of perspective on climate action and how significant they feel it is to the charity. And yeah, I think that's a great starting point. And also from our research, we did find that resistance from trustees and senior leadership in general was among the least common barriers to action. So, I think take from that what you will, but yeah, just don't make assumptions.
Not making assumptions is always good advice. I think the ideal scenario is if you can do the process that Jen just talked about, like asking those big questions, and if you can get board buy-in to that, then you have already centered it at the heart of your sort of vision and your strategy. And then from then on, it's just a question of beginning to, working out what's the next small step that we can, the first small step that we can take that will then build momentum. But I just want to share a story I know from someone who got their organization to really major on it. And they were relatively junior in the organization, and they didn't have leadership that were particularly engaged with the topic. But they were very persuasive. What they managed to do was just ask the board for sort of 10 minutes on the agenda, which is a quite small ask. It was quite hard for a board to say no to that, right? And then from that, they managed to get the sort of first question, which then led to a sort of, they needed to report back, and it sort of built momentum from there. So I think even if you're thinking that it might not be feasible to get the board to ask those big questions, and I think on some boards that would be hard if the rest of the trustees aren't in that place, I think getting it onto the agenda at all will be a really useful first step. And once you start having those conversations, it will build, particularly the more you can draw those links as part of that conversation.
What a lovely note to end on. Just 10 minutes on the next agenda. That's such a practical next step, isn't it? Whatever stage you are on your journey. Thank you so much to all of the board. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. And thank you to everyone for the tips and questions you've shared in the chat. I shall hand back to Daisy to close.
Thank you so much, Liz, and to Janet and Jen and Samira as well. What a wonderful conversation. I always reflect in these sessions how quickly this hour goes, and I'm also reflect how grateful I am that so many people turned up on a busy afternoon to come and stop and think about this issue. And actually, if you come into the session, can be that conversation starter at your next board meeting to say, actually, I was in this was really interesting, can we start a conversation? Then that would be a brilliant way to take some action directly from this. I've popped into the chat a couple of links just really to signpost you onwards, really. So you book today via Eventbrite. We've got some interesting future sessions coming up in the next couple of weeks, some stuff around finance. We have some intro sessions where you can submit a dilemma, and then like an expert panel will talk about how they might approach it. I always think that's good to have a nosy at what's going on in other people's organisations, but also come away with some practical help about how you might tackle those. The other link is an evaluation form. So all of the sessions that we run come from you saying, that was really good, or that wasn't that good. Can we have a session on this, please? And then I take that big list and go, yep, here's this session. So I want you to know that we're very much listening to where you're at and what you need, and we create the future sessions based on that. So if you'd like to fill that in, that'd be great. And then I've just chucked our website in there as well. There's loads of resources. I said in the chat that I've copied all of the links that we've spoken today, so I'll send those around so you've got those to go away and read as well. Mainly, I just want to know that you're not alone in navigating these issues. So if you ever do feel lonely thinking, oh, I'm the only person thinking about this on my board, or I want to get some more information, please come back to us. We've got lots of support available, and we've got lots of friends in people on our panels and kind of wider that really are rooting for you to be the best trustees that you can. So On that note, I just wanted to thank you very much for your time. Thank you again to Liz, Janet, Jen and Samira, and we hope to see you at a session again soon in the future. Take care.